Brava listeners, pagi hari ini Stephen Locke, CEO dari Edelman Indonesia. Good morning, Stephen. How do you do?
Good morning. Very good, thank you.
So how's the traffic in Jakarta in this rainy day?
It's special, isn't it? I've got used to it now.
Okay. So Edelman Indonesia is expanding its business into a fully integrated marketing solution agency beginning this year, yeah?
Yes, well, we've always done quite a lot in the integrated space, but now with huge changes in technology, we're doing much more with big data, and we're doing much more by integrating what we do in traditional PR with big data, with paid, with advertising, really but to help clients and brands in particular really engage with people who now don't necessarily read newspapers. They watch lots of different sorts of television, and of course they tweet constantly. So the way of reaching people is much more multifaceted than it's ever been before.
Okay, so Stephen, you said that the lines are blurring between marketing and also PR, the industry, I mean. And now clients demand more than you mentioned before, the traditional PR and media relations services. How would you
well, funny enough,
this?
I think part of my role, particularly here, is not so much what clients are demanding, but going to clients and saying, hey, there's some really cool things you can do. And in many ways, trying to introduce them to some of the new techniques and say, look, there are some really great things you can do, which, by the way, are actually much cheaper than you ever did before. and you can prove that they work. I mean, that's one of the great things I think that digital technology particularly allows us. It allows us much more transparency and to prove. That's always been the problem with PR. Could you prove it was value for money? Could you prove it works? Well, with technology, we get much closer to that.
Okay, and Edelman Indonesia has also launched the digital newsroom. Can you tell us more about the newborn and how it benefits your clients?
It's very exciting. It's a bit like working in a TV station because we have these guys sitting in front of screens. And it's all real time and watching what's going on the internet and watching what's happening on broadcast media. And the objective is with clients that have messages they want to really tailor with what's being said in real time, real conversations in Indonesia. We're able to watch what's being said on Twitter, watch what's being said on other social platforms, and know exactly when to issue their messages, what to optimize, what to localize. And we do that in conjunction with some of our paid services, some of our promoted services, like promoted video, promoted tweets, and so forth. And that really allows us to help clients to really push their message at the very moment when people are talking about relevant topics.
Okay, and Robert Phillips, the former CEO of Edelman, once wrote an interesting book entitled "Trust Me, PR is Dead."
I know Robert very well. He's
so
he's like Jakarta traffic. He's quite special. No, I think what he was saying in terms of the death of spin, I think is absolutely right. I think the global PR industry was very led by developments that came out of political campaigning in the United States in the late 80s and early 1990s. Classically, the way that Bill Clinton ran his first election campaign, and that was very much about spin. And I come from Britain, and I worked in the 1997 election campaign for Tony Blair's people, and of course spin was a really big part of what we did there. And spin sort of killed PR because it was about trying to take the truth, hide it, twist it, repackage it in such a way that people would really notice what was going on. And that broke the trust between voters and politicians. It began to break the trust between consumers and brands. And where we've got to now is that spin process is completely counterproductive. So we're trying to get back to truth-telling and storytelling. And the thing which is most important, and you see it every day on Twitter, is authenticity. And when people and when companies aren't being authentic, that's when they get called out on Twitter, and that's when they fall to pieces. So part of our job when we're helping clients is to try and keep them authentic when they're talking about themselves and their products.
Okay, so is it true that nowadays the traditional PR is no longer relevant with the global situation?
I think traditional PR techniques, including things like press conferences and the occasional press release, they have a place, but they're just one teeny tiny part of a whole menu of things.
It's no longer priority, yeah?
Absolutely. And if you think about chaps like you, journalists, you have to do more output.
Yeah.
Across more platforms. A lot of journalists are doing TV, they're doing online, they're doing print. And the fact is they don't have time to go to all these press conferences anymore. So it's about packaging information in ways which is easy for media to understand, but also easy for people to understand. So use of infographics, use of video, other more modern and non-traditional techniques to get information across is very important.
Alright, Stephen, we'll be right back after this. So, beberapa listeners, itu tadi perbincangan saya di awal-awal saja bersama Stephen Locke, CEO dari Edelman Indonesia di The Captain pagi hari ini. Anda jangan kemana-mana, because the conversation is getting more interesting. Stay tuned. Okay, Stephen, the Indonesian market is growing rapidly. We all know that, and it's becoming more sophisticated also. How do you see the competition itself between, Indonesia's public relations industries at the moment?
Well, there's certainly a lot of competition, and that keeps us on our toes. I mean, it's different in different parts of the industry where we work. So, for instance, in our corporate and public issues practices, there tends to be a lot less competition than we find in other countries. So we probably only compete with 2 or 3 other companies, which is kind of nice and makes our life easier. But in consumer PR, Indonesia has a really vibrant, young and dynamic industry, so there are lots and lots of agencies. So competition there is very tough. But where we've tried to put together this integrated PR and marketing approach with a lot of emphasis on new technology and digital, in that space there's a lot less competition. And I think around the world what we've seen is that in countries which have adopted these new techniques, one of the consequences of that is they have to invest in technology and they have to invest in software and all sorts of really expensive and clever stuff. And that means that agencies have to get bigger to cover those costs. And so you tend to see the industry consolidate. So Indonesia's at a really interesting time from the industry point of view, because at the moment we have lots and lots of small PR agencies, and 5-10 years from now, there'll be a lot fewer agencies and they'll be bigger. And they'll have more specialism. So the industry will go through change. At the moment, anybody with a laptop and a mobile phone can set up a PR agency and do consumer PR. In 10 years' time, that's not going to be possible.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you now about your secret recipe here. I mean, like, what kind of strategy would you apply right now to retain your position, your Edelman's position as the largest PR firm in Indonesia?
Oddly enough, I'm really relaxed about whether we're the largest, second largest, or whatever. I'm not really interested in size.
Ranks,
What I'm interested in is being the best and quality, and so we spend a lot of time entering awards around the world, and we love it when Indonesia wins awards in international PR and marketing awards, because that shows that not only are we doing well in terms of Indonesia, but Indonesia's doing well in terms of the quality of work we're doing at a worldwide scale, and that's really important to us. And the other thing, frankly, is it's a business, so we want to do that and do it in a way that's commercially viable and makes profit. So I'm not ashamed of trying to make profit. Profit is a good thing, but really what I really want to do is to innovate and to push the quality. And if you innovate and push the quality, the business stuff will follow.
Will roll, yeah? Okay, and tell us more about the Edelman Trust Barometer. What does it show?
We're very excited about this. We do it every year. It was launched this week in Davos. It's 15th year around the world we've done it. We launch it every year in Davos, and we launch the Indonesian results at the beginning of February. And it'll be the 7th year we've done this survey in Indonesia. And so around the world, it's a survey of about 33,000 people measuring trust in government, in media, in NGOs, in business. And in types of media and types of business, different sectors, and it gives us a really interesting snapshot about how to the general public, but also a separate group of people we call informed publics, how they approach trust, and it helps us diagnose for clients the best way they should be doing their communications.
Okay, the 2015 Edelman Trust Barometer shows a global decline in trust over the last year, and the number of countries with trusted institutions has fallen to an all-time low among the informed public. Does it happen in Indonesia as well?
I mean, worldwide, more than half countries now have less than 50% trust across all institutions, and trust in government around the world has really sort of gone back to the Great Recession levels of sort of 2008, 2009. Indonesia is very different from the global average. Indonesia is consistently, and I've seen this now over the last 5 years, Indonesia is consistently one of the more trusting countries, but
okay, there's a but.
There's a but. There are definitely signs of change in certain areas in Indonesia. I'm not going to go into the Indonesian results in great detail, but what was really interesting about the results for Indonesia is we were doing the survey while Jokowi was discussing fuel subsidies.
Okay.
So we all knew there'd be a so-called Jokowi effect in terms of, everyone Jokowi is so popular, almost unexplainable, the enormous popularity he has. But we were doing the survey while there was all that controversy about cutting fuel subsidies. So the results we will give in 2 weeks' time will be Indonesia at that time. And so it'll be interesting to see where trust in government was during that moment of great controversy. The other thing I'm really interested to look at is where trust in media is. Trust in media in Indonesia has consistently, year after year, been one of the highest in the world.
Wow.
And a lot of that comes, if you like, from the legacy of Reformasi and the role the media played in that and continues to play. But last year we saw a really interesting twisting, if you like, of
last year
of how editors and their owners, how proprietors of particularly television stations and newspapers
during the election.
Yeah, and so we tracked last year a lot of end public dissatisfaction with spin that they were being given from their media. So one of the interesting things is to look at where trust in media has gone, and there has been a change in trust in media, and in particular in traditional mainstream media, and that's not so pretty in Indonesia. And so it sends a very strong message, I think, to the rich businessmen that own TV stations and newspapers. If you want to retain the trust of your readers, and if you don't, by the way, the advertisers will flee, but if you want to retain trust of your readers, of your viewers, of your listeners, you've got to be authentic, and you've got to stop trying to spin for your favourite political party, because we've got a very strong sense that people don't like that.
But anyway, it's going to be released in the 1st February, yeah?
3rd of February, yeah.
3rd of February, okay. So, you mentioned before about Jokowi, and what is your view, your personal view probably, on Jokowi's administrations now with regards to public trust in government and also business?
I think that there was enormous expectations. And Indonesians are very interesting because they want, I sometimes say that Indonesia is a bit like a car, a very smart car, but only with 2 gears, fifth and reverse. Okay. And at the moment, everyone's in 5th gear, and they want the country to change incredibly quickly. And I think it's very difficult, whoever won the election, to deliver change at the pace that people want. So I think at the moment we've got some areas of frustration. But if Jokowi can deliver a pace of reform and change and prove to people that he's delivering on his promises, then I think he will do pretty well. But inevitably, some people's expectations, including, by the way, foreign business and foreign media, some of their expectations of Jokowi were completely unreasonable. And I think we're beginning to see, not just domestically here in Indonesia, but also internationally, some frustration and disappointment, which I think is inevitable. It's the end of the honeymoon period. And now we're deep into the marriage, and so that's where he's facing things right now.
Okay, Stephen, we'll talk more after this. Dan Bro Business, Anda jangan kemana-mana, tetap di The Captain, karena saya bersama Stephen Locke akan segera kembali. Okay, Stephen, you have been working in this industry for 10 years now. How did PRing interest you in the first place?
Rather frighteningly, it's actually been 22 years.
22 years?
That old. I did law at university, and by the time I finished, I loved law, but I hated the idea of being a lawyer. And then...
Why is that? I'm sorry. Before that,
particularly in the UK, I didn't want to spend my life drafting documents and in dry, dusty disputes. And then I was a banker for a while. I was a Eurobond trader and at an investment bank in London and also in New York. And what I discovered was I was really bad at it. And to this day, I can't remember the difference between a put and a call, which is tough if you're a bond trader. So my boss at the time said, "You really are the worst banker we've ever had." But he said, what you could be quite good at, he said, was investor relations. And so I got this gig doing investor relations consultancy for the African Development Bank and a project for them. And then I kind of fell into PR doing from that process. And I loved it. And I love the fact that as a consultancy, as an agency, you've got a range of clients you work for, and it's different every single day. And yes, over year after year after year, there's experiences you get which are similar, and you can draw upon a kind of heritage of what worked and what didn't in different industries. But I love the fact I work with this incredibly different mix of people. And I've been really lucky. The last 15 years I've worked in 6 different countries, and that's been really exciting. Okay,
so in your opinion, what makes a good leader, since you're also a leader in Edelman?
Yeah, I'm always terrified by that question. And I don't feel as, I'm not one of those people that feels like, I'm a great leader. But what I think is really important is honesty.
Honesty.
I mentioned before that authenticity was really crucial to successful PR, and that when people weren't authentic, they were generally called out on it. I do think that for leadership, honesty is very important, and to create an environment where people can be brave about having ideas and also be brave about making those ideas work. And sometimes they won't work, and you have to have an environment where people are allowed to fail. Ideally as a business, you don't constantly fail, but you have to, if you're going to make ideas work, if you're going to innovate, then sometimes, of course, there will be failure. But honesty is very important, and honesty builds trust between your colleagues and ultimately builds trust with clients and with other stakeholders. So I think driving friendly honesty is really important.
So, what is your main strategy to lead? I mean, in a company as big as Edelman.
Well, of course, I just lead one relatively small part of it. We're 140 people in Indonesia, in Jakarta, which is big for a PR firm in Indonesia. But Edelman globally is about 6,000 people. And I have a role with our regional sort of government relations practice. And I've got some great colleagues in that in other countries. I love that we have the time and space to do really unique insights and research. So I'm very lucky. I'm able to put time and effort into researching politics and policies in Indonesia, and package that in a way to try and explain the countries to foreign investors in particular. And sometimes I go and give talks and lectures in places like Washington about this is what Indonesia's really like, and so here's what you've read in the New York Times, but actually here's what's really like. And that I think is great.
Okay, so could you describe business in 3 words only?
Ideas make money.
Ideas make money. Couldn't agree more. All right. Indonesia is the 6th country where you lived. You mentioned before, right? What is the most interesting thing about Indonesia since you live here? Up to now.
Up to now, I think it's the extraordinary diversity of different sorts of people in Indonesia. I mean, it's amazing how the country works because it's so many different people, different ethnicities, different religions. And it works somehow in some mad mix. It does seem to work, and people get together. It's a great role model, I think, for many other countries around the world.
So, during your work in Edelman, Indonesia, what do you think that glued it? All these different ethnicities, religions, during your surveys and all. You interviewed a lot of people, I bet. And,
I think that one of the real strong senses I get about Indonesia is a real pride that the country forged itself in the chaos at the end of the colonial period, and whereas many other countries kind of imploded and collapsed in that chaotic period, I think Indonesians are rightly really proud of the fact that they built a nation and sustained it despite the huge forces of things like communism and Americanism and all the other things that surrounded them around the world. And so I'm not at all surprised that one of the real drivers of politics, of popular opinion in Indonesia, is pride in Indonesia and wanting other countries to respect that pride. And I think that's perfectly understandable.
Okay, so Stephen, after this, we're going to talk a lot more about your personality, your more personal life, okay? Then the segment ini, Stephen, we're going to talk more about your personal life, if that's okay with you.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, Indonesia is the 6th country that you lived in, right? So, among all other countries that you've been, which is the toughest?
There are different things about different countries which are hard. I think working in Indonesia, and it's the first Asian country I've lived in, understanding and working around the Asian yes is really
it's
hard.
very interesting, Brava listeners. He mentioned about this, quote-unquote culture, yeah? Asian yes. Can you, brief more about Asian yes?
Because the Asian yes just means I've heard you. Okay. It doesn't necessarily mean I agree with you, and still less does it mean I'm going to do the thing you asked me to do. And it took me, I think, a good 6 months to realise that yes was merely, a starting point of agreement. And so working around that. So the Asian yes takes a while to get used to. But the hardest thing was when I lived in Russia, 6 years of Russian winters. That was tough.
Okay, 6 years of winter, yeah? So how about Indonesia? What's the toughest thing to live here?
Do you know what? I find this the easiest country I've ever lived in. For all sorts of reasons. I think it's a very welcoming country, and really, compared to some of the others, it's the easiest country I've lived in.
Okay. Can you tell us more about Well, we've heard that you have, special interest towards paintings.
Yeah, I do. I collect contemporary art, and
Really?
so
Since when?
Oh, for years actually. But Indonesia is the most amazing place to live from that point of view. And when I first moved here, everyone said, "Oh, you got to go to Bali," and I've been to Bali, and there's some good stuff there. But what I've discovered in the last 4 years almost is the fantastic stuff that's in Yogyakarta.
Yogyakarta.
So I actually go down to Jogja quite a lot, and I've got a couple of people there who are really good at introducing me to new artists, and so I go down and see some really exciting work. So I'm lucky I have a house with a lot of wall. I may need to build another wall because I'm running out of space. But no, there's some great artists in Jogja, and every year I go down to the Art Jodge contemporary art show, which is in June, which I think is fantastic. It's one of the best in Southeast Asia, and one of the great things about being a boss is you can choose what projects you put some support behind. So this year, for the second year, Edelman will be the sort of pro bono PR advisor to Art Jodge, and I'm very excited that this year we're going to bring in some journalists from Europe and North America, because they just don't understand and they don't know about the really good stuff that's happening outside of Bali and Jakarta. So we're going to take them into Yogyakarta and we're going to show them contemporary art. It's going to be very cool.
Okay, so where are your other collections? Where do you put it? And beside your house?
Actually, my mother comes to visit quite a lot, and I've noticed the occasional painting is clearly being leaked back into Europe. So I have to keep an eye on that.
So, what's the simple thing, probably that can make you happy? Just a simple question.
Music is very important to me. I'm passionate about music. I love the playlist you have here. It reminds me of being a teenager. My musical tastes have changed a lot as I've gotten older, and I'm passionate about opera, and Russian opera in particular. So if you come by my house at the weekend, there's a lot of loud Russian music.
Those polka, yeah?
Yeah. A lot of Shostakovich.
Okay, so if you're not juggling between work and projects, what do you do in your leisure time?
One of the great things about living in Jakarta is the fantastic food, and so I've enjoyed a lot of that, and so I love trying new restaurants in Jakarta. But actually, I like travelling around Java in particular. I've spent a lot of time in the last year travelling around different places in Java, and it's been really interesting. I love places like Malang and Magelang, and I did some great trips into the centre of Java and East Java, and I did this great trip last year, a kind of pilgrimage to Blitar.
To Blitar?
Yeah,
okay.
to the Sakari Mausoleum, and it was really weird because everybody there, I was the only boule that was there, and everybody wanted to take photographs of me and put it on Facebook, which was, I'm not the guy that people want to photograph, and so that was strange.
Okay, so you mentioned about music. Do you have any, favorite song that you'd like to hear after this interview?
Well, as a teenager, I was during the New Romantic period.
New wave, yeah.
Lots of floppy hair and bright pink T-shirts, and so
David Bowie, I suppose.
a bit after that, but Duran Duran and Culture Club were the music of my teenage years.
You still have one of those shirts in your drawer, probably.
I'm not going to confess.
Okay, Stephen, we're going to play your favorite song. After this, it's Duran Duran, Save a Prayer. So thank you very much for coming to the studio.
It's been a great pleasure.
All the best for you, your dogs, and also your company.
Thank you very much.
Oke, dan berapa itu tadi perbincangan saya di The Captain bersama CEO dari Edelman Indonesia, Stephen Locke. Dan Anda bisa nantikan The Captain minggu depan, dan tentunya akan menghadirkan narasumber yang tidak kalah inspiratifnya. Anda jangan kemana-mana, karena saya partner Anda Leonardo Ringo masih terus menemani Anda di Good Day Jakarta sampai tepat jam 11 nanti. Dan Anda sudah dengar intronya. This is his favorite song, Duran Duran, Save a Prayer.